was a document, a roundabout way to deal with the Rakhine State issue. So from this, I've not looked at it properly, I'm supposed to look at it for almost a year now, but if you look at those two documents, and you read those two documents, it's actually an ASEAN way of telling some countries in ASEAN, hey, you've got problems, and please deal with the problems in this way. So that entry point is something that we have not explored. I talked about it in Bangkok, I think 2 years ago, but we haven't explored it properly in terms of the Rakhine State. So third, and this may be quite controversial, I postulate that the ASEAN human rights institutions and mechanism was not really meant to be strong, because compared to the Inter-American system, compared to the African system, where they were coming out from wars, dirty wars, and huge conflict, fortunately we didn't have that in the region. Because we didn't have that in the region, our institutions were not sort of needed to be that strong. And if you look at the issue of the Rakhine State, where human rights is not even mentioned, does it require something worse than the Rakhine State in the region before ASEAN is prepared to strengthen our own institutions and mechanisms? And so it's something that you do not want to wish for in the region, but if you are looking at strengthening the institutions, or you're looking forward, then is this something that requires even more serious conflict, even more destabilization of the region before our institutions wake up and become stronger by way of a regional intergovernmental arrangement? Finally, there is of course a danger that some member states may become frustrated and may give up on human rights diplomacy. But to be fair, I don't understand this, because why doesn't Indonesia, why doesn't Malaysia, why doesn't Thailand, why doesn't Laos have a human rights envoy in the region? Vietnam has one of the best LGBTIQ laws in the region. So I was joking, I won't say who, but I was joking, internally, and I said, hey, your laws are really good, right? Yes. I said, why? What was the logic? Why is Vietnam having LGBTIQ laws that are so good? Because our country have this problem. We're so good because we are so bad on other things. That's why we are so good on that, right? So I said, okay, can we do a program? Let's do a program on, say, gender equality or something. We don't need to call it LGBTIQ because I won't accept. So why don't we just do a program on sensitization, good practices of Vietnam on these laws, and then why don't Vietnam is a human rights envoy on LGBTIQ rights? That goes to Malaysia, that goes to Indonesia, that goes to Philippines, and say this is what we do. Why do I think it's the Danish I think, that came to meet me, or the Dutch, or they have human rights envoys, right? So every time there's an ASEAN meeting, they'll say, oh, come, let's meet. And I look at the card, human rights envoy on freedom of religion and thought. Why do these countries have? Of course, they will say, yeah, because our standards are there, we meet those standards. But surely there's no country that's perfect. So why doesn't ASEAN, or why doesn't member states have these human rights envoys? Why doesn't CSIS have a human rights envoy for Indonesia or for other think tanks? Why doesn't ISIS Malaysia? Why doesn't Malaysia have a human rights envoy for water and sanitation, or for example? I'm just giving very. Why doesn't ASEAN have that? Does that kind of mechanism allow more opportunities for engagement, allow more opportunities for pressure points? That is something that we want to explore a bit later, and that's something that I've also been tasked to do within the Foreign Ministry, and I would like to open it up for views if it's possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I welcome for three question or intervention from the floor on the very interesting point raised by Your Excellency Mr. Edmund. Yes. Any insight, perhaps from Dr. Noel Morena, that come far away from the representative of responsibility to protect Asia Pacific?
Seems like you've read my mind. Well, I'm glad, and I'd like to just thank Edmund for his presentation, giving us some insights on his experience in the ICHAR. Well, one of the things that I'd like to just emphasize is that when you talk about, and I'm going straight to the point about Myanmar and Rakhine and ICHAR and ASEAN, which is, basically a regional problem that needs to be confronted. And I've been saying this also to some of our colleagues in the UN. First, is there a mechanism for regular interaction between offices of the UN in Geneva and in New York on human rights advocacy, using the language of human rights up front as a starting point? And how do you adopt that at the regional level? The second point that I'd like to raise is that within the ICHAR, has there been any initiative to engage the security sector, even to at least mainstream the idea of human rights protection as part of, the idea of the role of the security sector, not just in conflict prevention and peace building, but protection of civilian? Because Myanmar and other ASEAN members are more than willing to participate in UN peace missions abroad. And there are learning experiences. And as a matter of fact, I know that there were some military officials from Myanmar who have visited the Philippines, and particularly in Mindanao, and have engaged with the military in the Philippines on the issue of the conflict in Mindanao. So I think there are opportunities that are already there at the bilateral level that needs to be elevated at the regional level. So I think that is one way by which we can also mainstream, because I think the problem with just focusing on the political role of ICHAR is that we should have a more open mind and really engage the security sector to start discussing the role of the security sector in promoting culture of prevention, if we want to really mainstream that ASEAN declaration. The third point I'd like to make is that our work in the center, when we try to advocate responsibility to protect, and many people in the region and across the world have the misconception that R2P is all about intervention. That's what happened in Libya. But we've been saying, actually at the core of R2P principle is prevention. And in many of our engagement in the region, including in Indonesia, one thing that we need to understand is that intervention comes only when there's manifest failure on the part of states to fulfill their primary responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from the war crimes. And at the core of R2P is actually human rights protection, the minorities, the vulnerable groups. And so I think when we start to look at human rights as a fundamental norm that needs to be upheld, then I think we need to look at the long-term implications of mainstreaming human rights protection. But at the same time, and this is my last point, we need to also understand the context in Myanmar. 50 years of military rule, and the military is still not willing to really give up their power. And it's disheartening because in many ways, I don't think there's another country similar to Myanmar where the military is still dominant, and at the same time the country has, according to the latest thing that I read, at least 40 non-state armed groups that are fighting for their own autonomy or independence. And this is, I think, the main justification of the military, why it's not willing to withdraw and really allow a civilian government. So I'm a little bit nervous because the NLD is now proposing a change to the constitution. And there are clear signs already that the military will not allow this to happen. And the more international pressure is coming in with regard to the issue of Rakhine, and other ethnic nationality groups may actually push the military to be more hardline in its position. Thank you.
Do you want to respond directly
Yeah.
because it's too complex?
No, it's okay. That's why, yeah. Thanks, Noel. I think your points are very, very. On the UN issue, correct me if I'm wrong, Chaka, but I think Myanmar doesn't accept first the language, but also they look at it in terms of UNDP and UNHCR, but in terms of development. So the language with OHCHR, I think, my understanding from my interaction is that the language is not being used because Myanmar is basically saying you give us this thing, we provide the infrastructure. If you are happy, then we can bring them back. Because the last I spoke with the UN group was that Myanmar is supposed to agree to some quick impact projects where then they will be opened up for development funding before the repatriation happens. But it was some time ago, so I do not know what has happened so far. And I think ASEAN will not publicly support the repatriation until the AHA Center does the needs assessment. And now I suspect the problem is they need funds to do the needs assessment on top of the expertise. That's what I suspect. I have said a few times, I'm not Indonesian, right? But I've said a few times that AHA Center needs to be engaged. And of course, when AICHA does the invitation, or even we informally go and speak to AHA Center, we are seen as coming from a human rights perspective. And I've, even with now the current government, I've advised the foreign minister that you may need some, because if I say it very bluntly, when AMM gives the direction to AHA Center, I suspect AHA Center was very surprised in 2016. I think that was the first direction. Because suddenly out of the blue, there's no technical discussion behind the scenes first. This is what we want you to do. And then when the direction was given, I think in Singapore 2017, yeah, I asked at the AICHA meeting with Ibu Dina, I said, I want to have an update report on what AHA Center is doing. AHA Center didn't come for the Singapore meeting, but AHA Center sent the ASEAN Secretariat that was supporting ACDF to come and do a really good PowerPoint slide. I said, what, for 2 years you've just been doing this? You've been delivering aid here, and that's all. And I don't know whether the aid even goes to the... So that was when the feelers came up, because then I started to realize when we went back to our SOM, and we said, hey, AMM, do you all know what you all are doing when you direct AHA Center? Is there support? Is there technical support? Or is AHA Center just saying, okay, this is the direction, I'll just do what I want, but I'm scared to go into the human rights arena. Because AHA Center is getting direction directly from the ministers. When it's actually supposed to be, to my knowledge, it's supposed to be the ACDM, the ASEAN Committee for Disaster Management, which is a SOM, more of the SOM level. So that is one human rights versus humanitarian type of perspective. I don't see the UN using that language. But your second point about the conflict prevention and engaging the security sector, yes, we thought about it. But can I just ask you, Noel, if you were to do a forum, just give me a name where we can invite some PC and we can invite Myanmar, and Myanmar will agree to have that discussion on the Rakhine State. Just that name. Even to come up with that name is so difficult, because the name cannot be on the Rakhine State. In ACWC, one of the better commissions where they have a bit more leeway to do their own thing, I've been told that during the meetings, when the Rakhine State issue comes up, and during when our engagement with them as well came up, the ACWC representatives from some countries would not even let that issue be raised in the meeting. And for AICHA to have been able to push through certain things, even putting on agenda and having a debate even on agenda at our last meeting, was, I think, to a large extent to the credit of the Myanmar representative on ICHA, Ambassador Lamin. He's back at ICHA. He's actually a human rights man. He was for the NHRI in Myanmar. And it's to his credit actually that he has really been very open as much as he could, engaging with us on ICHA. And I hope that there's more opportunities to open up with the new representative. But it really depends on the personality as well. But I think that's a good point. I think perhaps the AMM needs to not only deal with ICHA, but AHA Center, but maybe look into this SOMTC issue. SOMTC already has a lot on their plate, including the trafficking issues and the consensus on the migrant workers stuff.
Any more question from the floor? Intervention or comment? Pak Chaka, maybe?
You are here, so you must speak. Could you tell us an update? Can I ask you the question now? What is the update that is possible that you can tell us on the Rakhine State now with the AHA Center?
Okay, thank you Edmund for the presentation first. Since you put me on the spot, then I have to say something. First on the issue on Rakhine State, I think our center is currently doing the, trying to do the needs assessment that they are being asked by the ASEAN leaders from the last. So they are in the stage of trying to do the assessment efforts. But coming back to your presentation earlier, in terms of human rights diplomacy in ASEAN, I think there are several issues that are interconnected. First, in terms of the language, I think it cannot be, it has to be put in the context of the global human rights diplomacy, where the division between North and South, the West and the developing countries are very visible on this issue. That's why I think your emphasis on human rights language, I think somehow is a bit, has to be put in the context in ASEAN. Of course, right to development and right to peace, they are not accepted by the Westerners. They consider it non-existent. So you have to be careful in putting the issue on language, on human rights on this matter. But what is most important is that the principle of human rights-based approach are there. You have said it earlier that in terms of Rakhine, there are some kind of human rights principles, inclusive, transparent, good governance, respect to rule of law. They are what I understand from my background is about human rights-based approach, victim-centered also. So as long as those principles are there, you don't have to really put the language of the full human rights protection there. That's my first point. The second point is about the ICHA itself. It is interesting to note that you mentioned that ICHA has done some 60 plus activities. But in my view, that those, if we can put those activities into dots, they are not interconnected to one another. You may want to put forward the issue of water. You put the issue of judicial system. But then how to connect the dot between the water and judicial? You don't have a big plan, grand strategy for that. So I think that's something that has to be built by ICHA so that their activities can be related to one another to progress the human rights in a more concerted way. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Chaka from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Maybe from the Malaysia representative perhaps to think about delivering the human rights envoy. We can see that Malaysia is one of the countries that is most progressive currently. It signed the Rome Statute, and perhaps it would be the leader in human rights development in ASEAN with its new Malaysia, please.
Thank you, Fitri. And maybe before I start, I would like to address what Edmund had said earlier that he's being spied on. I'm here as a friend, and I might have read somewhere in the invitation that this is under the House of Chatham Rules. If it is so, then I think I'm glad to be able to share some of the insights as to the working of ASEAN at the moment. Especially in the context of, or in reference to what AHA Center is looking at doing in Rakhine. What Edmund had said earlier was correct. I mean, they have this funding issue. That said, they are still going ahead with the assessment. I think you are aware that this is going to take place, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And they do have a plan as to what needs to be done over the course of the year. And this is where I think the more intricate questions are being asked, because we have a situation, we have an objective where we need to be repatriating those who have been displaced back to where they came from. And our center just do not have the expertise, and I think it is not so much because of what they do, but it is, I think the fundamental question is because we have not been looking at, I mean, collectively as ASEAN, we have not been looking at Rakhine or Rohingya questions as a human rights question. We have been looking at it more as